Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cole's Vault Finance Unlocked, where we tap the knowledge of experts to uncover their most valuable insights and strategies. I'm your host, Cole Enerson, and on today's episode, we're talking with Lexus Holliday, founder of Budget with Lex. Lexus lays out a fantastic roadmap for financial success and gives her tips to find financial freedom. Before we jump in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us share this vault of knowledge with even more listeners. Now, without further ado, let's dial in and nab some knowledge. Very excited tonight to be joined by one of my childhood friends and neighbors, Lexus Latham, now Lexus Holliday. Lexus, stoked to be here with you.
Hey, thank you. Likewise.
So Lexus is a financial coach. Lexus, I'm going to let you tell us more about that. But Lexus also has a really unique story about why finance is important to her. And so grateful that you took some time today. So do you want to introduce a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, for sure. So as mentioned, I'm Lexus Holliday. Cole and I grew up together and had just an awesome little neighborhood, a great group there. I graduated with my accounting degree probably about 6 or so years ago and worked for quite a while in the tax realm, bookkeeping, worked remotely for a fractional CFO company for a while, but my heart has always been on personal finance. I took a course when I was going to school up in Idaho, and it just won my heart over. So a few years back, I started doing personal finance coaching and just kind of stopped and started revamping that a little while ago. And so now going strong and loving it. And it's just such an awesome thing.
So I actually didn't know that you went to school in Idaho. Did you go up to
Yes.
BOUI for a while?
Yeah. So that's where I went before I got married. And when I got married, my husband said that was way too far. And so we needed to go somewhere closer. So went to SCU over in Cedar City.
Props to Jace. Brought you out of the Arctic.
Yes, I know. So true. I loved it, but so cold. So true.
Yeah, it's beautiful up there. Audrey, so my wife, is from Idaho Falls. And so I tease her that it's the Arctic 'cause it's so cold up there.
Truth. Yes.
So, no, that's awesome. So are you, I think that your background is so interesting to be a financial coach because you do have the background in accounting and tax, like you mentioned. Like when I think, who do I want to help me figure out finance? I think everybody's mind goes to an accountant. Like that's just natural. Do you feel like, your experience there bleeds into what you're doing now?
I would say to some degree. I also find that it's pretty interesting because I'm meeting with people who are accountants that they laugh and they say, I know I should know this. And I laugh because I'm like, no, you really shouldn't. Like in all of my schooling, like I said, with the exception of up in Idaho, I had the personal finance class, but that was really just for a fun class. Like I needed a filler. But otherwise, through any of my schooling, like nobody taught me how to do personal finances. Nobody taught me about getting out of debt, about saving up for emergencies, about all these things. And so when I have these accountants approach me and say, I know I should be doing better, I'm like, I know you should be doing better, but not a result of your schooling. Like you're at the same place as everybody else.
Yeah. It's so funny. That's one thing that gets me every time I think about the education system. I think there's a ton of great things about the education system, but one of the things that gets me is we don't talk about some of these basic life skills in finance that everybody's going to have to deal with. And they don't, I don't know. I'm sure we had a course, back in high school together that covered some of it, but I'm sure at that point my mind was elsewhere. So is what it is, I guess.
For sure.
So you are, you're not just like, somebody giving advice to somebody. You're licensed as a financial coach, right?
Yeah. And it's not a requirement. So kind of interesting. So I first, like I said, I mentioned Dave Ramsey. So I was in my personal finance class that some of the curriculum was actually on Dave Ramsey. And so I was super curious and wanted to get to know him a little more. And so I started listening to his podcast. And so when my husband and I got married, we both had car loans. And I still remember well, pretty quickly, we're like, if we have the amount of money to pay off my car, like, why is it sitting in our bank account? So we wrote the check, paid it in full. But then I still remember coming back from our honeymoon and how romantic. I was like, let's listen to the Dave Ramsey podcast. We had like an 11-hour drive. And so we're listening. I was like,
I'm
I
sure
really
Jace never
feel,
forgot that.
oh my God, I should ask him if he remembers. But I remember being like, I feel like very strongly, like we have a lot of money going for your truck in payments and we're about to go, single income while I'm going to school. Like I feel very strongly about selling that. And I remember he was just like, what? Like, quit talking. And so we kind of kept talking and talking. And then he approached me one day and he's like, I think you're right. And so we continued just learning about Dave Ramsey. And so there hit a point probably about 5 or so years ago that I was talking to someone and they were asking about a budget. And I was like, yeah, we do a budget every month together. And they were so inquisitive about it. And I was like, is this not just normal? Do people not know how to do a budget together like a couple? And so it kind of sparked, like, I love to help people, but I didn't know where to go from there. Like, I just barely finished my accounting degree. So it was probably about 6 years ago then. And so I was like, I'm going to get licensed or certified as a financial coach through Dave Ramsey's program, just because I wanted somebody to say, like, trust me. Like, why would they have a reason to trust me otherwise? So I got
Yeah.
certified, and doing that for a while, it was good, but I don't know. I just felt like I was trying to be Dave Ramsey, and that's not the vibe that I wanted to provide. Like, I wanted to provide what I had to offer and offer it from me, myself, Lexus Holliday.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are familiar with Dave Ramsey. And even Dave Ramsey himself will say, I'm speaking to the masses. It's going to be different for everybody. It's always a little bit different. And you bring up an interesting part of this, and that's that a lot of people are doing finances as a couple. And especially as you get married, that can be a wake up call because you don't have full insight into what your spouse was doing before, what their expectations are. Even if you've talked about it, it's a little different when it's in practice. What are some of the challenges that you see working with couples versus individuals?
Yes. And it's interesting that you mention challenges because I love when it's a couple because you automatically have somebody to help you along the way. But it can also be challenging because I do meet with a lot of couples who are just married. Like I'm meeting with quite a few of them. And it's very interesting to see the habits that they bring from the relationship that their parents had with money and with each other and trying to figure out what that looks like as one cohesive group. And it's interesting how some are very much this is your money, this is my money. And I
Yeah.
love what Dave Ramsey, says about that. And I just shared something on my story the other day that essentially if you share a bed, you can share a bank account. And that it's interesting, the concept that what you spend your money on is what you find value in and what you find important. And so if you're having that same unified goal and working towards those same things and spending the financial realm towards those things, just how powerful that can be. So I'd say fewer challenges as a couple, more unifying. And then it's also fun meeting more and more with these couples to see those guards go down. And at first it's kind of like, oh, hold up, I don't know about this. And then seeing the excitement as they really like feed off each other and make these decisions together, it is so powerful. It's really cool.
Yeah. And I'm sure you bring up things that sometimes one of the spouses might not know how to ask or how to bring up, or if they know it's a touchy subject. It's like, hey, I'm not gonna cross that line, but if Lexus crosses it, just naturally, then I'm good. So
Mhm.
that's so fun. I love working with people. That's one of the things I miss most about my current job versus what I was doing before is I miss that like personal interaction of what's going on in people's lives and how does that dynamic between couples work. So that's way fun. I'm jealous of you there.
Oh, you
Um,
should be.
yeah. So what does it look like for somebody to work with you? Is it, like you have regular meetings? Are you
Mhm.
checking in? What does that look like?
Yes. So when I started this about March of last year, it has definitely transitioned quite a bit. So it's been going for almost a year now, but it is on fire and it's so fun to see the variety. And there are so many people interested in it right now. Like I had 5 consult calls yesterday. I have 4 more lined up for tomorrow. Had one right before we jumped on this interview. And so the process of how that works is somebody will usually reach out to me. And I've gotten rid of really all my social media handles except for Instagram. So it's through Instagram they're reaching out and saying, hey, I've got something going on. And from there, kind of get a feel for what they're wanting to do. And then we start with a consult call. And that's really where we see, if we're in line with what we're wanting to do, with what I'm offering, and with what they're wanting to achieve. And then from there, we schedule out our first meeting about a week out. And my process, so some people, very few, will do a one-off session where they're saying, hey, I want a tailored budget to myself. Like, I've got a pretty good handle, just help me fine tune a couple of things. Hands down, probably 98% of the people I meet with do 3 sessions. And so those first three sessions are very pretty standard and typical. They're about 1 hour long, once a month. And that first session is all about awareness. I learned when I first started meeting with people, I just have them show up and say, hey, we're going to start looking through your finances. And that just did not work. So now
Yeah. They're like,
prior, I
what
send out,
finances? Where?
yes, yes.
What
I'd be
do
like,
they look like?
yes. No, I'd be like, how much do you spend on groceries? And they're like 200. They come and they're like, it was like 850, and that was a slow month.
A little
So
off. A little off.
yes, yes. So it's really fun. That first one is so much an awareness one for couples together. Sometimes one's a little more aware than the other, sometimes both, but also an awareness for me. I really see, where their money is at, like savings, checking, debt. We go through their entire previous month to see like all the categories of what they've spent. And then we use that to create a budget very specific to them, to kind of move forward. So that first one is very much awareness. The next one is that's when we really get intentional. We start setting timelines. Okay, we want this goal. Well, when are we going to have it based on our current like allocations for these things? And like, what do we need to change to get there? And then that third one is really our habit forming. Like, we've done it for 2 months in a row. Now we're making it a habit. Like I mentioned, I've been married for almost 10 years, and still every month I'll put our budget together, and Jason and I'll sit down and say, all right, like, is this getting us to where we want to go? And how did it go last month? So pretty
Yeah.
incredible, pretty fun to see.
Yeah. Let's double tap on that, because I think that's an interesting piece. You said on a monthly basis.
Mhm.
I love your Instagram. I think it's got a great vibe. It's everything that personal finance should be. And one of the things that you have mentioned on there in the past is that you should have a budget for every month. And that hit me a little bit, because I'm used to thinking, I'm going to set a budget. It's a monthly budget, right? I'm accounting for my inflows and outflows during the month, but that's the same for January, February, March, April. And I find that they're not all the same. And so does that look different every month, or what? How do you do that?
I want the least amount of friction as possible. My goal with any person I meet with, again, is to do a budget within the first 5 days of every single month. So I don't want them, reinventing the wheel every time we do it. So it's a copy from the previous month, but every month is going to be a little different. Like, oh, last month we may not have had licensing the vehicle. Last month, maybe it wasn't Thanksgiving. Maybe we need to throw, another $100 or $200 in there for groceries. So it's not an extremely high amount that it's changing every month, but it definitely is saying, okay, as much as we're aware, how are we going to divide this up for the month we've got coming up?
Yeah. Okay. And I like that, because like for me, it's January. I know all my vehicle registrations are January. I've got, Christmas in December, etc. There's always something. So you've done a lot on uh, budgets and tracking budgets. Some people use a spreadsheet. Some people use apps. What do you like? Is there anything you recommend?
So what I found to be most successful is we use a combination of both. So I really don't care what people use for the app of choice. I literally just see that as the means to pull transactions to categorize them. But then we use a spreadsheet so that we can see the big picture. And it's been fun. Like my average client makes about 120,000. So that's average. So we've got higher and lower end of those. Average 120. And a lot of them have already been doing some form of a budget and some form of an app prior to meeting. So what I've seen really taking that to the next level is, okay, now we see like this is what we're estimating. We may have seen what comes in, but then it just stops there. So it's fun to use the coordination of the two to say, okay, well, what did we have left over, or what did we go over? Where did that money come from if we went over? And if we have extra, where are we making sure to follow up to put that? Are we throwing it towards debt? Are we throwing it towards our next goal of savings? Like whatever it is, we want to make sure we're plugging that in. So it's fun to see that that's like the follow up. So I care less about the app and more about like the big picture and making it on whatever that paper looks. looks like.
Yeah. I think there's I think there's something to like a review. For me, I I don't have a silver bullet. I still don't know what I use. I change it all the time. But I do feel like when I use a spreadsheet and I go back and I say, okay, let's look at the whole month, not just track it and okay, now I'm seeing the next month in my app. That's been nice. Um, Tell us a little bit about a zero-based budget. What is that?
Yes. So in general, I kind of hate the word budget because I feel like immediately when people hear that word, and even myself, when I hear the word budget, what I think of is I need to restrict for like a period of time. And so what I really want to like convey is that a budget is actually just allocating and deciding what you're going to do with your money. And so a zero-based budget is how you get there. So say you have $6,000 coming in that month. Well, we're going to decide exactly how you're going to spend that $6,000. So when somebody invites you and your family to the movie, do you really want to spend $50 going there? Or are you saving up for a side by side that you'd rather do that? And so what I love about a zero-based budget is you're literally taking your income, you've got all your expense categories, and you're plugging in every single one of those numbers to get down to zero for that budget so that you really understand that opportunity cost. And it's interesting because some people kind of get hands up. I'd say over half the people I'm working with are self-employed. And so they're like, my income's very volatile. Like,
It's
how
a
do
lot.
I plan? Yeah. For example, like one person I met with went from 4,000 one month to 16,000 the next. They're like, how do I plan for that? So we always kind of do like the base, like an average for that situation in general. It's usually about 78,000. And that's where we really look at that emergency fund to say, okay, we'll make sure like we'll have the difference to cover it if we don't. But this is kind of your standard expectation. We're going to still budget out every dollar. If you have more than that, we're going to plug it in here, here, and here. If you have less than that, we're going to dip into that money we've set aside so that we can still maintain this lifestyle that we've created.
Yeah. Okay, so you've got kind of like a slush fund. You're saying here's what we're generally going to be at. You've got, a separate amount of cash set aside that you're okay to dip into to supplement if needed.
And some we really go on like that lower end if we don't have that reserve and we're still getting out of debt. But then we always know if we make more, where are we plugging it into? Where is it going to? We're still going to budget out every single dollar and we're not going to have any excuses not to do so.
Hmm. I like that. Just telling your money where it's going rather than floating by the wind.
Yeah,
Um, what's you mentioned emergency fund. How do you go about building an emergency fund?
for sure. So even when we were, talking about personal finance, like what are the goals or the objectives, those are the first things that came to mind was a budget and the baby steps. And part of the baby steps, which the baby steps I'm talking about is Dave Ramsey's 7 baby steps, is the first one is to have a $1,000 emergency fund. So prior for anything I'm doing with my clients, prior to the goals that they want to achieve, is we're getting out of debt. But to get out of debt, we don't want to throw all of our money at the debt and then have new tires and have to go finance them for $800.
Yeah,
So
it's
an emergency fund
counterproductive.
is exactly. It's that little window or buffer that keeps you from going into debt, essentially. In my eyes, it's my replacement for the need for a credit card. It's saying, okay, what is the money that I have and what is it that I can use to do what I need to do, essentially?
Yeah. So do you use credit cards at all?
No, we have not had a credit card once, or that's a lie. I think we might have started out with a credit card in our marriage, but we cut it up and closed the account and haven't turned back since.
Here you go. It's funny. I was going to ask you. I was going to say, well, wouldn't that be difficult to build your credit doing that? But then I thought that's the point. Is that you're your own bank. You don't need the credit. So
And it's interesting. That's one thing that I don't push too hard on my clients because that can sometimes be a lot of pushback. So it kind of depends. But I give them this condition. You can keep the credit card, but as soon as there's 1 month that you do not pay it in full, you're getting rid of it. Can I tell you, there's only been one client who has went the time that I met with them that has not paid it in full 1 month. And so it's interesting, just that temptation alone. So many people, I usually pay it in full, but that usually gets us every single time. Just knowing that that's an option and available, it's that temptation. It's just a killer.
yeah, we'll take as much of the leash as you give us anytime.
Mhm.
And
For
that's
sure.
interesting to me because, like you said, your average client's making six figures. Like these,
Mhm.
these probably aren't people who are most of the time. just skimping by on their income side. And
Mhm.
so it's really about lifestyle. Um, so
Sure.
and kind of maybe moving back to that a little bit, are you helping them primarily on the expense management? Do you help people at all with income? If somebody says, "Hey, we like our lifestyle, we're okay to cut it back a little bit, but eventually we just like to grow our income," is that part of it at all?
So it's fun because I immediately think of fitness. And like some people are pretty hung up on like burning more calories. Some people are hung up on eating fewer calories. So I kind of think of that, with finance. How are we going to address this? Are there things we're going to start cutting out, or is it an income problem? I'd say 80% of our time is just really focusing on that overconsumption that's been up to this point. I would say most people in general aren't really, well, that's a lie. I mean, there have been some that have taken on additional jobs to up that income. It's kind of a combo of both.
Yeah. That makes sense. That's probably one of those where it's situational of, what lifestyle do you want and how much time are you willing to allocate towards your income? Because the expense management is probably less time consuming if you're willing to do it right, you know?
For sure.
Oh, great. And you're big on paying off debt. So you mentioned you've got that $1,000 emergency fund and you're paying off debt. How do you go about paying off debt when somebody has, maybe they've got credit card loans, maybe they've got a car loan, student loans? I mean, you can finance things on online, right? They've got those like short term, I think it's called a firm is one of them. How do you go about paying off debt?
We very much do the debt snowball. We list out those debts, smallest to largest, and we start with the smallest and we start knocking things out. It's really fun to see. There's sometimes some pushback. Well, what about this? Like, I don't owe any interest to this person. Sometimes it's like a family loan and or a doctor's loan, and it's not having any interest accruing. And so sometimes they'll be like, I want to list that down and knock out these other ones first. We're beyond logic at that point. We're really looking for wins. And so as we knock out that first like $200 one and we start going towards that other one and knocking out there, it's so fun to see the traction we get there. And that was like, for example, like I just met with somebody and they had 5 items of debt. We knocked out 3 within the first meeting because they had the cash sitting in the bank account. They just didn't make the connection to pay those off. And so continuing to work through those, like it's so fun to see that motivation and that momentum just carrying them forward.
Yeah. I'm I'm a math guy, and so I always come back to the thought, which I'm sure somebody's thrown at you, of, well, I've got, you know, 24% interest on my credit card, but I've got this smaller loan that, yeah, say has, a 6% interest rate. And so it feels from a math perspective that we should pay off the higher interest rate. But I love what you're saying because it's the wins. It's the wins. It's that behavioral steroid shot that keeps you going. Because otherwise, I don't think it's very motivating.
I see some people that they're anxious to go and do debt consolidation. And I'm working with some couples who they did that. And it's pretty hard when you're hitting these $2,000, $10,000 ones, then you reach the $68,000 one. That's hard. And when we hit that point, that's when I start talking about we need to make the $10,000 decisions. Like you've overconsumed up in your life up to this point. What $10,000 decision can we make? What asset do you have that we could sell that's going to be $10,000 or more of value to start digging us out of this hole? Because once you get in that debt consolidation mode where, okay, combining the interest rates, less payments you have to make, it takes away all that momentum. Like we knocked out those other ones so fast, that's such a large sum to be sitting there. So it's interesting. You start taking logic out and it's funny, sometimes people are reason with me. I'm like, if this was a logic question, we wouldn't be in debt in the first place. So we need to change the logic that you're currently using to get us to a different place.
That's totally fair. And sometimes there's like, I'm just thinking through like my personal life. So like we've had student loans, and one of the cool things is that I look at personally, I look at our student loans as a block, but really it's made up of all these little loans from each semester. And so you can pay some of those off and reduce the amount you pay each month. And that feels like such a win, like especially when we were newlyweds. If you could pay one of those off and you saved another like $50 a month, that felt like a mountain.
And I just had somebody in the same circumstance. They had 5 within their student loans and starting to knock those out. Same thing. It wasn't just this lump sum. Like those were all individual loans with names to them and things that got crossed off. So I completely agree.
So what are your thoughts on productive debt versus non-productive debt? Because I know and that you're okay with debt for a house. Is the house the only thing? Are there other assets, et cetera, that you'd be okay taking debt on? What are your thoughts?
I am committed. I am committed to the debt-free lifestyle. So yes, I will go for the house. I myself have a mortgage on my house as we speak. But anything else, no, I push hard. And I say that as well. I don't want I kind of give the caveat to that I meet people where they're at. So I'm not going to turn someone away if there's certain things they're working towards as well and just at a different place. But no, that's what I push is no debt outside of the house.
So okay, we've got our $1,000 emergency fund. We're paying down debt. We got all our debt paid down. What's next?
So yes, so baby step 3 is 3 to 6 months in a fully funded emergency fund. And so it's pretty fun that up to this point with the clients I've been working with, we've been doing month to month budgets. We know where they're at. So we're able to plug that in to say, okay, we on average you've been spending 4 to 5 thousand if we take away this and this. So let's start out, with a $12,000-15,000 beginner emergency or like lower end emergency fund. And then depending on comfort, that can be going up to, a $30,000 emergency fund. And I'd say it definitely changes person to person and especially their level of comfort. And we kind of run through scenarios like, what would this look like? Like if your husband or yourself were out of work for 6 months, do you feel like that could cover you? If you both were out of work, do you feel like that could cover you? If I don't know, we start just throwing through different scenarios. If you had a vehicle go out and you didn't have the full coverage, would that cover you? And so especially for my people who are self-employed, this is an area they really like to bulk up so that they feel like,
Oh, yeah.
okay, 6 months, we're fine. Like we can maintain our lifestyle that we're doing.
Yeah, because a lot of self-employment's pretty cyclical, depending on what business
Mhm.
you're in. So that can be really tough.
Yes,
Um,
for sure.
so it sounds like you're saying 3 to 6 months of whatever our budget or that zero-based budget, whatever that outflow was. I'm looking for 3 to 6 months of that. I know I've heard some people say, "Oh, it's gross income, it's net income." You're saying we've already created a plan, we've got it here. We just want to be able to sustain the same lifestyle.
Yes. And we really don't get too hung up. Like I'm not worried if it's going to be the difference of 1,000 or $2,000. Like we're looking for an average and something that gives us a level of comfort and something that will keep us from feeling like we're just going to have to revert back to the debt that we just came out of. So yes, less worried about the details and more worried about that whole idea of that safety net.
Yeah. So when can you touch the safety net? When am I allowed to dig into that emergency fund and spend it?
So I was just meeting with somebody and they're like, yep, we started saving up. We got our emergency fund. And then my son had his appendix rupture. So we got flown, we went to primary
Oh,
children's, da,
wow.
da, da. And they were doing this, and this. And so I set a payment plan for this and this and kind of like heard her out. And then I was like, okay, let's review like what we were just saying. And it had been like a little period of time. So don't worry, like everything's at a
Yeah.
good place now medically. But I was kind of laughing. I was like, so an emergency fund. So what is an emergency fund for? And they're like, well, if I have to go to the hospital or something. And we just start laughing. So I'm like, why are you on a payment plan? Like, how can you better define an emergency than like going for a medical procedure to a hospital? And so she was laughing as she went and paid and called in and paid in full. But it's funny how in our minds, like that's just like that safety, we don't want to use it. But I would say anytime that you're at the point where you need to go and you feel like, oh, I would need to incur some kind of a debt to make this happen, it's kind of fun because it's a challenge to us. Like, do I really want to take away from this safety net? Do I want this bad enough? And if so, then it's like, hey, then it's probably a pretty legitimate reason for you to be using that. It's kind of, again, I just always think that it's our replacement for the need to use debt.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good litmus test. It's a good check-in
Yeah.
for sure. Okay, so what about the house? When you think about debt on the house, what should people be thinking about?
Yes. So I'd say a lot of my clients I'm working with is that's their goal is purchasing or building a home. And so a lot of
Tough
them were
these
still in a
days.
step. Yes, yes, it's in a much different market than what it was 5 years ago. So again, our first thing is that's almost the holdup for everyone is we're getting out of debt and getting that emergency fund. And it's kind of funny talking to some because they're like, I'm just anxious, like I'm paying $1,300 in rent, like on the low end, and I'm just anxious to get out of where I'm at. And so I laugh. I'm like, well, what happens when your water heater goes out? What happens when you're like us? We purchased our home and had to save up 10,000 for a new roof. Like, where's that money going to come
Yeah.
from if you're already so tight on your funds? Like, we want you to be prepared for when the time comes. So yes, get out of debt, 3 to 6 months of expenses in your fully funded emergency fund. And that's the goal is 20% down on the house. Otherwise, they're going to hit that PMI. And we'd love to avoid that when we can, for sure, for sure. Another kind of limit that we set there is we're looking for 25% of our net pay going to our mortgage so that we're not house poor. We don't want to be spending, half of our income and feeling like we can't go do anything else. Really looking to be in that 25% range. So
I like the 25% limit. Going through my education, it was always taught, yeah, like the mid 20s on the house is your cap, and then 36% total all debt. And the mid 20s is much more manageable. So I love that.
mhm, I love it.
So when you get to that point, I think for most people, they would say, I have made it in life. If I'm debt free, I've got 20% equity in my home. I'm doing pretty well. What should they think about after that?
So I'd say this is where it gets people. And this is the people that I'm meeting with 10, 20 years down the road saying, crap, I hit that cushion point and then everything just kind of hit the wall, went and started doing their own thing. So I would say my first advice here is always have something you're saving for, whether it's when we really do kind of let off the gas some, but don't want to just revert back to old habits and then go right back to where we were. So now this is where it's fun. This is where we start doing baby steps 4, 5, and 6 simultaneously. And that's 4 is investing 15% of your income into retirement. 5 is saving for your children's college, and 6 is paying off your home early, which I might have mixed up 5 and 6, but we can kind of do those all at the same time. So this is the fun place. This is our goal place to be in. It's a lot.
Yeah, there's so many options at that point. At that
Mhm.
point in life, you're probably feeling like I have some free cash flow, disposable income. I can start to get some of the toys I want. You have a lot of things open up. And I think that's when it's the easiest, like you said, to be able to just let loose and forget, even if you're continuing to budget, not living on that same level of income, which you were probably pretty happy doing, to be honest.
Mhm.
And I think that gets a lot of people.
That's what I love. And I'm like, I meet with some people that they've had obviously some pretty good education, but I'm like, hey, we're going back to how you lived. What did that look like when you're going to college? And then what shifted once you started making that money? How do we get back to that place? And so same advice. Yeah. Like how do we to maintain that? And we don't have to leave to be so strict. Like some people's budgets are we can't go over this. Some are just, okay, what do we expect to spend? And again, always have something we're saving or working towards so that we keep progressing rather than just being stagnant and immediately starting to go back in that opposite direction.
Yeah. So is it just a balance of priorities at that point of determining if I want to invest for my future, if I want to pay down my house early? Is it just kind of a personal feel of what's next?
I would say that we definitely always push the retirement first. It's interesting that some people don't realize you can have retirement. They immediately say, well, my employer doesn't offer it, or I'm self employed. And I'm like, that doesn't matter. So our preference is first always to go to the match that your employer offers. That's often between like 4 to 6%. And then from there, we'll go because our goal is, 15%. From there, we'll go into a Roth IRA. And once that's maxed out, then we can start looking at a traditional IRA. So that really, we love hitting that 15% because that one's going to be a solid investment for us. And then from there, it is, yeah, do you want to focus on your kids' education? Do you want to pay off your house? Are you interested in real estate? Are you like, what do you want to do with your money? And I'd say a lot of times people, when they hit this point, they're like, we just like skimped and saved so much. Like, we just want to live for a while. I'm like, do it. Like, you have my permission. Go and do something fun for a bit. But then let's get on track too and say, okay, what are our goals? Like, what do we want to achieve? We've got some good options here.
And hopefully some of those habits are instilled. I've seen countless retirees who get into retirement and they can't spend their money. they've
Mm-hmm.
saved and they've saved, and they don't know how to spend it. And
Mm-hmm.
so it is tough to find that balance between things. I know that one of the things that we do that's pretty simple for the mortgage payoff, we just pay twice a month, and so we'll pay like on the 1st and the 15th, cuts a few years off.
Yes, yes, I've seen that. I think that's awesome.
It's funny you mentioned like the self-employed people, because I mean with your background, you know about all of the different retirement accounts and things that they can do there. How does your background with tax help in your financial coaching?
So it's fun, because even mentioning, now we can do real estate. Like I'm meeting with some people that they have some like a rental, and so we're talking about different ways to get out of debt. And we were just like looking through the rental and just how much it was losing them money. So they're looking to sell that, and so immediately I was like, okay, now keep in mind, the taxes, the capital gains, like what is your tax return looking like, and it's everything there. So it's kind of fun to like see it from all aspects. And it's fun to be on this end where the goal is really to see their like financial picture in whole. Whereas on the tax preparation side, it was often like our gear, we're geared towards preparing the tax return. So obviously our advice is going to be completely geared and beneficial towards that. So it's fun to say, okay, your big picture, this and this may make sense. The big picture, this is going to be better for you. And so it's fun to see that truly full circle. And some of the clients that I'm working with now were clients that I used to prepare the tax return for. So kind of insight on both
Yeah.
ends and to see how the advising works a little different. Just keeping all that in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I love the quote that if you have a hammer, your solution is always to pound in the nail. Like that's always the solution. And I've felt that in my job, right? If you're looking at just one isolated piece of the puzzle, it's not that it's bad advice, it's great advice. It's just looking at that one piece. So yeah, I think you're in a really unique position because of your background, because of everything you know, especially with small business. I was surprised to hear you say roughly 50% is from small business. But I think that's probably one of the cohorts that needs it the most, and frankly has the most complexity when it comes to budgeting.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And it's kind of fun too, just thinking about like the different people meeting in kind of different scenes and times of life. I heard a quote that when things change, things change. And so that's kind of the preface I set is most of the people that do the 3 appointments continue to meet. Some go to a weekly, some to go to a 2 to 3 week, or excuse me, monthly. Some go to a 2 to 3 month cadence just to kind of keep up on their goals. And then some it's we'll touch back again when we have a life-changing event, whether and that could be, different degrees of significance. It could be once we get this debt paid off. It can be once our emergency fund is fully funded. It can be once we get married, once we have this next baby, once we buy a house. And so it's so fun to see that definitely ebbs and flows and changes as different things come up in our life.
For sure. And it's interesting that people pay for a service to help them spend less. I love what you mentioned about
So,
fitness, because
mhm.
I know a lot of people who have hired like a fitness coach or personal trainer, and I feel like they get way better results because of the accountability and just working with somebody who's going to be there. You're going to have to talk to them and see them again. You're going to get a message if you don't show up. And I
Mhm.
think it goes a long way.
um, Kind of a follow up to what you're saying too is sometimes someone will reach out and say, "Hey, I'm interested. I don't know if my spouse is." And so sometimes like the feedback there is we know what we should be doing, but again, going back to the finance, like, or excuse me, the fitness, how many times can we Google things and look things up? And so we have like all this information available and we can access it. How many times have we went to courses? How many times have we went to seminars? But it's crazy that sometimes just what we need is somebody to say, "Okay, but for you, this is what you need to do. Sit down, let me walk you through these steps, and yeah, I'm going to ask you about it." And so it's fun to see that sometimes that's just the key little difference that we need to make to really help somebody carry on their way.
Well, if somebody wants to ask you more questions about what you do or find you, how would they do that?
Yes. So I got rid of all my other social media platforms and I'm strictly on Instagram. So look me up at Budget with Lex or well, Budget with Lex. You can connect with me there.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, Lexus, thank you for joining. It's great to see you. It's been a long time, and hopefully we get to see you again soon.
Thanks for sure. You as well. Thank you.